Thank you. We have a question over here, please.
Yes. Sorry, I have 40 questions, but the evening is not long enough, but I think this is for me one of the most important questions. Mr. Zimmer, do you really believe that you can solve one problem in the world with 8 or 10 fighters and warships for $20 billion? You already signed contracts. You signed contracts for one of the biggest spy agencies in Ottawa. You're building for $1.5 billion a new spy agency. And I want to ask you, who is your enemy? Is this the Syrian family? You can kill families, you can kill one fighter from IS, but you kill at the same time 20 young kids at the same time. The kind of war today, it's completely different than in our history.
Here,
and my question is, do you really believe you can solve those problems? Military expenditures are always a waste of money.
Anyone in particular want to address the question to?
Zimmer, he is responsible for at least $30 billion.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmer?
Yeah, I guess just so you know, I was in the room when the terrorists ran through the Parliament buildings. I was even closer than me to you today. And I wish that we didn't have to go in and drop bombs in Syria and do different things. But I think the reality that everybody needs to face in this room is there's bullies in the world. And unless somebody stands up to those bullies, they take over. And I wish there wasn't bullies, but there are. So it's our job as Canadians, it's always been our job as Canadians to try and keep peace through maintaining that effort against the bullies of the world. And we've done it in World War I, we've done it in World War II, and we're still doing it today. And I'd say I'm very proud of our military that does that on our behalf. And that's why we can go to bed and sleep at night, because we keep the bullies at bay. And that's exactly what we're doing in Syria. And we'll continue to do that to keep Canadians safe. Thanks.
Thank you. You may.
This is one thing that I really don't understand, and it's one of the things when I talk about our country irrevocably changing. What is this drumbeat for war, for crying out loud, and creating boogeymen around every tree and around every rock? It's highly exaggerated, and that's what politicians generally do to manipulate people into being frightened and to kind of give up civil rights. The other thing is essentially, why are we moving into a kind of a warmongering posture, for crying out loud? You know, we bombed Libya, we bombed Syria, we're posturing in Ukraine, we're doing this, we're buying military hardware, we're selling military hardware to Saudi Arabia. What is going on here? When I look at that, I think, do we want to go down this path any more than what we're already going down? It alarms me greatly.
I just have to jump in here. So Mr. Zimmer, you talk about not bullying and supporting our military, yet you were on the Standing Committee for Veteran Affairs, and the Conservative cut the services to the veterans. My brother-in-law, who has passed away, he was a veteran. My nephew was a veteran, and they talk about now in terms of trying to requiring services, and they call and they get an answering service. So in terms of who's the bully here, and just touching on Mr. Shaw's comments in terms of you can't have fear-based decision making. How do you build a country? How do you build a community? How do you build a neighborhood if you're afraid of your neighbor? You build your communities, you build your nation by learning about each other. Because you learn about each other, you appreciate your differences, and you celebrate those differences. Again, if you're afraid of your neighbor, you will never have a strong neighborhood. If you're afraid of you're so scared. How does that affect you? Do you build strong relationships? Do you have a stronger country? No, you have a fear base and everybody's scared. And that's, again, when I mentioned the Conservatives are doing fear-based decisions, that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening.
You may.
I feel like it's a lot about why Bill C-51 was put out right this year. I feel like it was to scare Canada, to scare us, terrorists, everyone. You're more likely to drown in your bathtub than be killed by a terrorist in Canada. It's not happening. They're not here. There was one random incident, and it's, unfortunately, if the polls are correct, it's working. All this talk about the hijab is distracting people away from the real issues, and it's putting up barricades against our Muslim population, and it's creating fear, and it's disgusting what's happening, and it's a disgusting tactic. And I was just up north for the last 2 weeks, and people are believing it, and that scares me the most. Someone said that they are absolutely never again going to vote Conservatives, but they're afraid of terrorists. And we need to educate ourselves and become more informed, because that's not an issue. We do not need to fight the war in Syria. We don't need to drop bombs on Syria for peace. That's not the answer. It's never going to work. We need to withdraw and go back to our peacekeeping nation that we were.
Thank you. I'll get to you in a second, Janie. Thank you. I have a couple questions from people who were unable to come tonight, so I'm just going to throw one out, if I may. Do you mind? Okay, thanks. This one is originally for Mr. Zimmer, but I think I'll open it up to everybody on the floor. Mr. Mulcair wants to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. That is going to be extremely hard on small business. And free daycare across the country, isn't that a provincial decision? What is your answer to this? And because it was directed to you originally, we'll start with you if that's okay. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We just talked about supports for small business, and I think the wage that we have is competitive in Canada. I think the proposals that the NDP are making, although they sound good on the surface, are impractical in the rollout. I've talked to many small businesses that if that's the case, they're going to have to reduce their workforce. You're talking about a staff of 3 or 2, you're going to have to reduce the staff by 1 person because of that increase. Again, it sounds good, but the way it really rolls out and plays out on the ground is quite a different story. The National Daycare Program, we're starting to see different provincial leaders understand that the Mulcair commitment to national daycare policy or program is reliant on a 40% buy-in by the province. So a lot of these provinces that are now hearing this are realizing that's going to cost us a whole bunch of money. And one of the premiers I noticed that said it's not even practical. A bare minimum cost for national daycare would at least be $25 with an injection from the provinces. And I know many provinces are saying they're just not buying into it. So again, it sounds good, and it sounds good. It sounds like it's going to roll it right away. Well, we've seen in the news the last number of weeks that the practical part of the plan is it's not going to roll out right away. It's going to take a long time. It's going to cost a lot more money than Mr. Mulcair is saying.
Thank you. Certainly. Yep.
I like a lot of the NDP's platform, but the reality with those two things is it's not going to happen. And the $15 minimum wage, that's for jobs under federal jurisdiction. That means that 95% of people aren't actually going to get that $15, so that's all smoke and mirrors. The other thing is the $15 a day daycare, like Mr. Zimmer said, it requires a lot of provincial buy-in, and a lot of those provinces are saying, we're not going to do that. So really, those two things are not going to happen. That's just the simple reality.
Thank you. Certainly.
I have to disagree that it's smoke and mirrors. Again, $15 a day, $15 a day daycare. I've spoken with families where they are looking at childcare up to like $1,500 a month. So one parent cannot afford to work. So you may have a parent that, if they had the $15 daycare, they could actually go out there and contribute to the economy again. So they take advantage of the fact that they have an education, to be able to add to the community, and having an income and having more disposable income. So actually, you can go shop in the stores, and you go spend money in the restaurants again. So support the small businesses as well. So again, the $15 a day daycare is not just for federals, and is not just smoke and mirrors. Again, we think that that's a way to really support human potential. Thank you.
You certainly may.
We're our Green Party platform. We're also doing $15 an hour. And yes, small businesses, that would be hard for them, but we're also drastically reducing small business taxes, so it should offset the costs.
Thank you. Sorry, Janie, do you have a question you want to put forth?
I just wanted to ask a question about the registry or gun laws of the different candidates, or for the different political platforms. When the Liberals were in, that they brought in a the gun registry, and then when the Conservatives were in, they modified it, and it's very difficult for people who are law-abiding citizens to get a hold of small quantities of gunpowder, things like that, for doing reloading or for doing hunting or for doing shooting. And I just wondered where each one of the candidates and their parties stands on that, and if they're going to introduce things like that.
Thank you. Certainly. Let's start with the Liberal Party.
I personally am completely against long gun registry and all of that. Like you said, it takes the most law-abiding citizens as a demographic. It takes those people and casts suspicion on them, and it was a bad idea, and it should never have happened, and it did happen. I'm personally really against that and feel very strongly about that. The other thing, though, is that Mr. Trudeau says he's not going to touch that. So essentially, that's a dead issue for the Liberals.
For the NDP?
A dead issue for the NDP as well. For living in the north, to us, long guns are a tool and they're a necessity. You know, a lot of us still go hunting, and so again, the NDP will not reinstate that long gun registry.
Thank you. For the Conservatives?
Yeah, it was one of the biggest crowning achievements that I had in Ottawa was being there for the vote for the long gun registry and its removal. You said it's still there in a shape or form. That's it's the long gun registry itself is gone. Some of the laws that were part of the mix afterwards, I had talked to certain gun establishments, and there were still different business clauses where they still had to write down in the green ledger book. So I went to the Minister Taves at the time. Within a week, we had that changed. So I guess, obviously, we're absolutely supportive of no long gun registry. We've always been supportive of a registry for restricted firearms. I have firearms myself. I'm an owner and a user of those. My kids have all used our firearms, so we're very much a firearms-friendly family. But I would just question the NDP and Lib claims. It's one thing to have the local candidates say one thing, but the national party leaders, and they might say one thing, but what they actually do in process, every time that we put up a vote for the bill against the registry, the NDP and the Libs always were against our removal of the registry in voting in the House. So I think you need to really look at the record. It's one thing, it's easy to say now that they're supportive of having it gone, but that's not what played out in the House when I stood and voted for that. So I think you just need to look at the record before you necessarily believe what the candidates will say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we should just leave it alone how it is now. I took my gun license. I'm a hiker. I hate guns. I'm so anti-gun, but I lived in the north for 12 years, and I go hiking in the backwoods for days. And it took me a whole day to go through the course. It was 8 hours. It was very intensive. I think we're doing things really well in Canada now, and we'd leave it alone.
I saw you moving to the mic.
Hi. I think it's great that all of the candidates have said they're supportive of small business. And this question, it's actually addressed to all of you, but first I have a specific question for Mr. Shaw, because in your, talk about small business, you mentioned reducing red tape. And which is great, all small business people like to hear that. But in the course of this campaign, Mr. Trudeau has said a couple of things that, as a small business person, I think, wow, that's going to increase red tape or issues. The first, very early on in the campaign, was his proposal for a flexible maternity leave for employees, so you could take 6 months, come back for 6 months, and take another 6 months later, which might be really nice for families, but for a small business owner trying to replace a key person for a 1 month or a 1 year stint is really difficult, let alone 2 6-month stints. So that was my first area of concern. And then the second, I just read it in the paper this week where he made a comment that small business is often a way for big business to save money. And personally, I don't know any small businesses that are backed by
Okay,
big business
is there a question
people.
here?
Yeah, so the question is, specifically, how does your party platform, as opposed to your personal belief, reduce red tape?
Thank you. I believe that was addressed to you initially.
Well, the second thing that you said about what Justin Trudeau said, he took a lot of flack for, and he should have. I mean, I think that he actually, I think it might have been taken possibly out of context. Nobody really thinks that small business owners are tax cheats or anything like that. And he doesn't either, and I don't, and nobody does. As far as the first thing you were talking about, how is that going to work? Honestly, I really don't know. I think it's a really good question, what you've just actually posed. Certainly, you can't, the employee has to work with the needs of the employer. And so, you know what, that's a great question. I really don't know. Something has to be worked out, though, because it can't be only up to the employee, because the business has obligations, right? So, yeah, good question.
Any other takers?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I'll speak to that. It's red tape reduction. We've just been determined on getting rid of red tape in Ottawa, and it's a challenging thing to do, trust me. But it's part of our red tape reduction action plan, and we have just one little small thing where if a regulation gets added, it's a mandate that another one has to be taken away, and that's just a small thing. But the way our ministers think, a lot of them are small business owners before we got these kind of jobs, and I was one too. So we look at it through that lens. What would it be like for a person on the ground to go through this particular legislation? So we try and reduce it on a regular basis. I'll just challenge the NDP on a certain position. This is actually voting in the House. So we've had, again, I think I mentioned before about Caterpillar leaving Canada, and we had people that stood up and were upset about Caterpillar leaving for Mexico, and we were upset too. We want them back. But in the next breath, we talk about increase to corporate tax rates, and they're supportive of corporate tax rates going from 15 to 19%. And that was at the time. I see it's only to 17 now. But I just wonder, how good is that going to be for small businesses that supply resources, supply parts, supply everything else to a company like Caterpillar? And I just think it's an out-of-touch business proposition in reality. The reality works. Small businesses feed off of other companies as well, and the more healthy everybody is, the better it is for us as job needers at the level where we need work. So I think the practical on the ground way it works is much different than the NDP thinks.
Thank you very much. Certainly for the NDP.
I mentioned some of my opening comments in terms of my concern over the direction Canada's taking. The Conservative government, again, they've had control over the House and the Senate for the last 4 years and been running for the last 10 years. So making all these promises now, why didn't they do it then? But in terms of, when I mentioned diversifying the economy, they're giving incentives to the big corporations. They're doing everything to attract the big corporations. Okay, as Mr. Zimmer said, well, the small little companies, they support the big corporations. And again, so it's the position has always been we have to support our big corporations. We have to support our big corporations. We need to diversify. We need to look at other things. Companies are not just there to service the big corporations. We are not there just to service the big corporations. Again, small business, it's not all just for the big corporations. So again, diversification. When we talk about, for instance, diversifying the forest industry. Okay, Mr. Zimmer talked about sending all these logs out. So why don't we do value added and not send the logs out? Why don't we do a bit more here in Canada rather than sending out all our natural resources to be processed elsewhere and sold back to us?
Thank you. We're good? Okay. Any more questions from the floor? Mr. John.
Good day, and thank you for coming to Valemount to share with us your political beliefs. I have a question about majority governments, minority governments, and coalition governments. I'm a little bit nervous anytime anybody has a majority because the others have very little latitude in affecting any change. And some would even say that it becomes an elected dictatorship. That, I don't know if I'd go that far, but my question is, how are you standing at being a part of a coalition government in Canada after this election?
Thank you. Why don't we start with the NDP this time? Is that to anybody in particular there, John, or is it to everybody? Okay, thank you.
In terms of, that's a difficult question to answer because you're kind of looking into the future. Well, I'm sure every one of us are running to have a majority government. But in terms of the coalition, again, we need, for the good of this country, we need to work together. So, again, we need to work together. That means a coalition, that means a coalition. Again, we need to work together. And again, the Conservatives had a majority government, and look what happened. Look what has happened to Canada. Again, so it could have been I think it would have been a lot better if we did have a coalition government.
Thank you. Yep.
Platform here. First, we're going to replace the first past the post system with proportional representation. Our current voting system is outdated, of course. It is the only voting system that allows a minority of the votes to elect a majority government with 100% of the power. It makes voters feel as if their vote just doesn't count, and it's time to replace it. So we're absolutely going to reform our voting system and get it back on track. Elizabeth May's talked from the very beginning about a coalition with the NDP and Liberals. Definitely not the Harper government. So that's where we stand, absolutely. We need to work together. Enough of this back and forth fighting. Progress cannot be made like that. We need to all, doesn't matter who has a majority, we need to work together in government to progress.
Thank you. Sure.
We really have to go to a proportional representation system. This system is a dinosaur, and everybody knows it. And it's one of the reasons why people feel like their votes don't count, and there's a lot of voter apathy out there. And so one thing the Liberal Party says is this will be, if we win, it'll be the last first past the post system. In any case, as far as coalitions go, I'll make a prediction. I bet the Conservatives they'll win a minority, and nobody will work with them. And so they will have the chance to form the government, but nobody wants to work with them. And so probably what will happen is we will have some sort of a coalition. And I think that that's actually a good thing, and I would like to see that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, well, we've actually had experience of this. So I have always said, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. If it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. So I won't presuppose to not work with any of these parties. Like to hear a mandate to say, I'm never going to work with that person. What if it's a good idea? I guess I'd like to be more open to if it's a practical good idea for Canadians, then we'll do that. We worked as a coalition for many years at the start. This was before I was in. And worked with the other parties. And, all things considered, if you really see the way committees work in Ottawa, especially our Ag Committee, for instance, we look to get agreement from all parties. Before we write a committee report or the rest of it, we'll try and come to a consensus. We really do try and work together on that side. So that's the reality of it. So I just wouldn't presuppose not working with anybody. I would just say that I think we need to be more practical like that. If something's good for Valemount, and I need to bring that forward to Ottawa, then I'm going to work with whoever to make that happen for Valemount. So I think I'm practical that way and would see it that way. The first past the post system, there's negatives to it, but there's also a lot of negatives to the other one being proposed. The other one proposes party lists. So essentially it could be a party puts their favorites forward. It might not be anybody even from the Peace, let's say, or Valemount or Northern Rockies or whoever. And that's who gets selected as the person that represents you. And I have a problem with that. I think the current system, with all its flaws, it still picks the local person for the job. And I think we should stick with it for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete, you got a question?
Good evening. I'm the president of the local branch 266 of the Royal Canadian Legion. I'll put this question to all candidates. We currently have 4 generations of veterans in this country. We will continue to have them as we become more combat aggressive. I'd like to know what your platforms are for veteran support in this country.
Thank you. Is that to anybody in particular or everybody in general? Everybody. Okay, great. Sure, let's start with the Green Party.
Well, it's the more, I'm very new at politics, and I thought I knew a lot, but I had to really become informed of all things. And the more I learned about our veterans, the sadder I got. It's just disgusting what we're doing to them. We've cut so much from the budget, our Veterans Affairs. I didn't know this, but if you were in Afghanistan and you come home and you're a veteran, now we do a lump sum payment. I've just learned this recently. We don't give them lifetime pensions anymore. We don't look after them. And if you have your legs, if you've lost your legs in the war and you come home to Canada, we give you $300,000 and say, see you later. That's not okay. Like, that's to me, that's a travesty. It's just not okay. We absolutely have to put all the money back plus more and look after our veterans and get out of Syria, stop this combat. We don't need to have more people coming home without legs.
Thank you.
So the NDP will reverse all the shameful cuts and services that they've done to Veteran Affairs. Again, well, I was really surprised to find out Mr. Zimmer was on that standing committee. Again, when I was speaking with my sister, who's a widow of a veteran, in terms of the services and all, how much difficulty she has to face. Again, so the NDP will reverse those cuts. Again, the fact that post-traumatic stress disorder is a real thing that has to be dealt with, and our veterans need to be supported. They've served our country. They put their lives on the line for our country, so we have to support them. Again, in terms of what the Conservatives have done, is absolutely shameful.
Can we, certainly, yep.
Okay, so you two have done a good job of sort of, giving my position too, same thing. So I'll just pose another question. Well, just needless to say, the Liberal Party is going to reinstate all the offices, reinstate everything, and actually augment services because it's a moral imperative. And as Canadians, the way Canada used to be, we took our moral obligations really, really seriously. We don't do that too much anymore, and I want to really pose the question, why is this happening? This is just one thing out of many things where people are looking and saying, what? This doesn't make any sense. This is not the Canada we've grown up in, the Canada that we actually sort of knew. How come this ideological shift is taking place? So it's a big question. We can talk about it after. But anyway, the veterans are very important to us, really important.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. I want to start off, when I was on Veterans Affairs Committee, every time I talked to a veteran that came to committee, I always thank them for their service on behalf of the riding, on behalf of all Canadians. Frankly, it's offensive that she would even say that. We deeply care about our veterans. There's been no decrease in veteran spending. It's actually been a net $5 billion increase since we've formed government. So all of this stuff that you've just heard is absolute baloney. We've actually increased funding to veterans, and it ticks me off to hear that, because it's using veterans. I don't know if you're a veteran, sir, yourself, but it's using veterans as a political tool, and I find it abhorrent. The fact of the matter is, Aaron O'Toole was a good friend of mine. He came in a by-election. He's a current VA minister, a good friend of mine. He's a veteran himself with little kids. And if you look up Aaron, even on the internet or wherever you can find him, he's absolutely compassionate about the needs for veterans and PTSD. We're increasing all we can to get the new problems with PTSD that are being discovered today. Soldiers are tough guys and tough ladies, and it's often very tough to come in and ask for help. And I'd even ask the room, if you ever hear of anybody with PTSD, let my office know, and we will help them as soon as we possibly can. My office has been instrumental in getting service for vets in Prince George and just dealing with some of those veterans that are returning with questions. Just don't believe the hype of the cuts. There's been a $5 billion increase in spending to vets since we've formed. So again, just understand the truth. Don't believe the hype.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? We're kind of running a little long here, so I kind of want to wrap this up shortly. So.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about proportional representation. I noticed Kathy didn't have a chance to speak on it yet. So any of the candidates that have more to add about that, I'd like to hear more about it. I'd like to know that I could vote for someone that would represent me rather than represent the government. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it sounds like there's two questions in there in terms of the proportional representation, which is one issue. I know in BC that they did this, they attempted to do the proportional representation and it didn't pass at that time. But in terms of the idea, I think is really good, and hopefully we could have that work in Canada in terms of, so for instance, if a party gets 35% of the vote, then they have 35% of the parties. But in terms of the other part in the question, in terms of being a spokesperson for this riding, so if I was selected as the MP, I would represent this riding. Again, I would be the voice of this riding. I went to an event in Prince George, and the fellow saying, well, you're kind of confined to a box if you're a part of a Liberal candidate. But for anyone who knows me, know that I speak. I refuse to be confined to a box in terms of I stand up for what I believe is right. I believe is what is right, and I have a strong voice. And if I'm elected, I'm here for the people in this riding. That's who I will be representing.
Thank you. Yep, you may.
We're the only party, the Green Party is the only party that doesn't whip our votes. So what that means is I'm allowed to speak for my riding and my constituents and find out the problems and take them to Ottawa and deal with it, and I can disagree with our Green Party and Elizabeth May. If something is affecting us here that goes against policy that I believe in, I need to bring there, I'm allowed to, because I'm allowed to speak freely. None of the other parties are. They have to follow and vote exactly what their leader says. So just so you know that we're the only party that allows that. So that gives me so much more freedom, because I get to understand the exact issues that affect each area and take it back to Ottawa. And I don't have to be afraid of being let go or taken out of my party.
Sorry. Sure. Do you want to start with the Conservative and
Sure.
then with the Liberal? Thank you.
Yeah, just so you know, every MP can vote their conscience anytime they want. That's the way our system works. The Conservative Party has the most free votes in the House. I will say this too, it's ironic hearing the NDP. The NDP has only had one free vote in the House the 4.5 years I've been there, and it was over a religious issue to deal with the Pope. Otherwise, they're whipped every vote. They're told by the party leader how to vote every single time, because some of their members have actually wanted to vote in support of the getting rid of the long gun registry, and they've been whipped into not doing it. Just look up Charlie Angus on that issue, and you'll find that. Liberals, to their credit, have a lot more free votes than the NDP, but the Conservatives by far have the most. And that's just the fact of the matter. We believe in democracy. I believe in representing my constituents. I bring your voice to Ottawa first. That's my first priority. I happen to be part of the Conservative Party, but I represent you. That's my first priority. So just so you know, that's the way it really works. What you choose to do when you're there, ultimately our first choice should be to represent our constituents.
Thank you. And
It's always a big question, party politics, how much real democracy is there, how much of the riding's needs are being communicated to Ottawa, et cetera. It's a big question. It's a big question for me as a candidate. One of the reasons I became a Liberal is because of the fact that the Liberal Party does allow a lot of free votes. And one thing about the Conservatives, they allow free votes, but they all think the same. It's like a big group think, and essentially, it's a big question, actually. So are we going to do a good job of communicating with your needs to Ottawa, or are we going to have a bunch of, and I'm not trying to be disingenuous here, but we don't want a bunch of robots coming from Ottawa and being transplanted into our communities and spouting the party line and telling us what we're supposed to think. We want exactly the opposite of that. So anyway, that's one thing that I'm really going to do is communicate your needs to Ottawa, for sure.
thank you. I think we'll have one more question from the floor, and then we'll get to closing statements.
Okay, I just had a quick question about strategic voting, and with this district, it seems like the Liberals should be on that table, and it's basically three parties versus one. And I'm not going against any of you, but right now the polls are showing the NDP is probably going to be the party that could challenge the Conservatives. And what do you guys do to maybe promote websites like strategic voting to topple the Harper government.
Certainly, yep. Start with the Liberal Party.
Important thing, and incidentally, last night's poll came out, a national poll. The Liberals were 32.5%, the Conservatives were 31.5%, and the NDP had actually dropped a little bit to 29% or something like that. So the fact is that things are always shifting. It's a pretty tight, tough three-way race. In this riding, Kathy, Dickie, and I might just lose. We probably will lose. I hate to do it. I hate to say that, because the fact is that probably 2/3 of the people in the riding want some change, but probably the Conservatives are going to get in. I think Bob is a decent fellow, by the way. I don't want to disparage him in any way, but the fact is that this is the system we have. It would be really good if somehow we could do it, but party politics prevents that, and I'm sad about it.
Like there's websites that show polls.
Yeah.
Strategic voting. Say I want.
Clock's ticking. Sorry. His time is.
Yeah, that's something. It's probably not going to happen very much, though. In some swing ridings, maybe that'll influence the vote a little bit, but the fact is, the Conservative machine is pretty big, pretty formidable.
Thank you. NDP and then Green and Conservative, I suspect.
So I'm new to the political thing. So when they talk about strategic voting, it almost sounds like a bit of a dirty word, because the person that gets selected in this to represent this riding is obviously has the most votes. So that's the person that will be speaking, hopefully, on behalf of the riding. So in terms of, okay, well, Mr. Zimmer here, of course, he's like leaps and bounds ahead of us, and but hopefully, Canada hopefully is ready for a change. And even though it's been 40-some years, where are we at now? But in terms of strategic votes, it's the people here that'll vote, and they'll decide. And I'm not going to go to Matt or Elizabeth and try and strategic vote, try and figure out how to beat Mr. Zimmer. But again, it's up to the people. When they go up and they vote, whoever the people select, that's who the person will be.
Thank you.
I'm new, like Kathy, to this being a politician, and the strategic voting argument, it makes me so sad. I've received over 100 emails just in this week alone saying I would vote for you in a heartbeat, but I want to strategically vote to get Harper out. And it just crushes me. People need to vote for who they believe in, who will best represent them, not because they think that it's going to work. Usually the history is clear. Strategic voting doesn't always work. It never has. So I just have something I wrote last week, and I like to say it again. Don't vote for a party you don't believe in to defeat Stephen Harper. Vote for a party you believe in, or we are already defeated.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to have a conversation with you, because a lot of the people that come up to me and say, I hate so-and-so, I hate Harper. I don't hate anybody up here. And often I'll ask why. And people like you probably won't be able to answer why. You might talk about he's this or he's that. But I can tell you, as a human being, he's a good guy. He's a Canadian that wants to have Canada as a strong country in the world. And he represents us, and that's what he does. He deliberately does on a daily basis. I asked him once, what do you like about your job the most? And he says, I like to lead the country. And that's nothing nefarious, it's nothing terrible. It's about giving sound leadership to a great country, and that's what I'm there. Somebody mentioned here to vote for those who you believe should be in government. And that's currently why we're in government. We have enough people that believe in us and our cause and the Conservative way and the economy and all the things that we've done, right? We haven't been perfect, but enough believe in us to run the country. And I hope after October 19th, we're going to get another opportunity to do that. Sound leadership for Canada. Thanks.
Thank you. I know I said one more question, but I think we got one more question.
Thanks, Dan. To me, what's the problem has been the country has not been run with integrity. And this is a one-word answer from each of you. And I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear it from your mouths. Will you represent us with integrity?
Thank you. That's going to the whole table. Thank you. Let's reverse the order and start with the Conservatives.
Sure. I'm gonna challenge that one-word answer because you challenged that we lack integrity before. I don't.
No, that's my opinion.
Yeah, but I'm gonna challenge you on that.
One-word answer.
Yeah, but I'm gonna say that we already do run it with integrity. Again, we're not perfect, but yes.
But
yes, we will run it with integrity. We'll continue.
Will you represent
Yes,
us?
I already
with
said
integrity?
yes. Absolutely.
Thank you. Moving down the table.
Can I have just a couple of words?
You got a minute and a half, actually.
Well, you better believe it. And, I've got a good life. I don't want anything. I can't be intimidated. I can't be bribed. I can't be, I don't really want anything. I just really want to help. And I don't have any agenda, but I really want to actually do some good. And this is really important to me. So you better believe it. I will represent you with integrity like you've never seen.
Thank you.
One word, yes, all capital letters followed by lots of exclamation points.
Thank you.
I'm going to use a couple words like these guys.
Fly at her.
If everyone, our budget, our Green Party budget is $3,000, so it's very hard for me to get the message out. So if you go on Facebook and you can read about me and what I stand for and what I've done for the last 12 years that I've lived in the North, and you can judge for yourself. It's my name, Elizabeth Bigger, on Facebook, and absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I knew it wouldn't be one word. Okay. I think that's it for questions from the floor. I'd like to move this along. I want to thank you for both your answers and from the people in the audience for their questions. Finally, we have closing statements. And closing statements, we're going to reverse the initial order of the opening statements. But before we do that, we have to take a commercial break while Gord changes his battery. Sorry. Oh, that was fast. Well done, Gord. You had a minute and a half. The yellow light didn't even go off. So reversing the order for closing statements, just to reiterate, you have 1.5 minutes for your closing statements. The order is Green Party will begin, followed by the Liberal Party, and then the Conservative, and then finally the NDP. Thank you.
I believe so strongly that we need to transition out of fossil fuels into renewable energy. That's why I'm here today, and it's not a scary thing. We can do it together. A Canada that works together to do this. Nobody's left behind. Everyone transitions into new green tech jobs, green infrastructure. Like I said, our budget was $3,000, so I've just returned here. I spent 2 days. I walked from Fort St. John to Dawson Creek to get our message out. My heart lies, why I'm an environmentalist, why I'm a green person, is because I see the world around us, not just Canada. The Syrian refugee crisis is absolutely terrible, and I believe it started from climate change, from drought. And if you research that, you can find some answers. And we're going to see more and more and more of that. Climate refugees all over the world. So that's why I walked from Fort St. John to Dawson Creek. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was 70 kilometers, and Dawson Creek and the wind there. To get the message out with our small amount of budget, I thought that would make a big impact. And just to show people, we need to change, not just for us and for Canada, but for the world and the people around us.
Thank you. And now for the Liberal Party.
So I think the big question is, does the government work for us, or do we have to be scared of the government and hope that they'll leave us alone if we're quiet enough? And I think that if we start going down this path another 4 years, I think that we're going to irrevocably change the complexion of Canada, like I had said before in my opening statement. I want to also mention that I don't think you should believe the narrative about, well, we don't like what they're doing, but, they're not bad money managers. In fact, they're not very good money managers. By every metric, they're actually not very good money managers. But they say they're good money managers. So anyway, the main thing is that every so often we need to refresh democracy. The reason I became a Liberal candidate was because I wanted to present you with an alternative, one that I'm very interested in business, I'm very interested in economics, very interested in doing the right thing. I want to promote opportunities as much as I can. I want to take your voice to Ottawa. We're a big party, and we're a business-oriented party, but we are not a war party, and we are not a citizen spying party, and we are a civil rights type of party. And we take that very seriously. We know what Canadian values are, and we don't like the way things are going right now. I remember, last number of times I've been to the U.S., I would always say, when they put the Patriot Act in, wow, I'm glad that I live in Canada. And when they put the National Defense Authorization Act in, I said, wow, man, phew, I'm glad they don't do that here. But they are doing it here. And you know what? Everybody instinctively knows that this is not a path we should be going down. So anyway, I kind of,
Thank you.
I hope that we won't let them win by default this time. Thanks.
Thank you. For the Conservative Party, thank you.
Thank you. Just to make a closing statement, I guess I'll just talk about the three pillars that I have personally as potentially your new member of Parliament. Jobs is number one on my agenda, to make sure that we continue with the job creation that we already have, but also to continue to diversify into other fields that are available to us in our resource-rich region. Also safety and security. One thing that I think a lot of Canadians care about, they see the threat of ISIL around the world. Some call it fear-mongering, but that's the reality. That's the way the world is right now. And it's our job as your government, and hopefully your government as of October 19th, to continue on with that and maintain our security, to maintain our Canadian pride. Unlike some of the other people that have mentioned this here, I'm not embarrassed to be a Canadian. I go down to Washington on a regular basis and talk to other congressmen and senators, and they lean forward on their desks and ask, why did Canada weather the global economic storm much better than most of us at the top of the G7? So I just would say, just don't believe their hype. We've done very well considering what we've gone through. I'll represent you in Valemount. I already know the industries here that are going. Again, we need to develop them more. I love Valemount. The people that I've met over this week and the time I was here in the summer, great people. We want to maintain your lifestyle here in Valemount and look forward to be your member of Parliament in the future. Just remember to vote for Bob Zimmer October 19th. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally for the NDP.
We are very fortunate to live in Canada. We have we're very, very natural resources. We have people from all over the world that want to come and make Canada their home. We're very, very fortunate, and we have so much potential. We have innovation. We have so much. There's industries that actually haven't even been invented yet, but will be. Facebook's been around not even 8 years, and look at that. Look at what has come along with there's over 11,000 jobs with Facebook in terms of that's a whole new platform for business again. So innovation and invention, and again, it's human ingenuity. And again, Canada is so very fortunate. And why I ran again is Mr. Zimmer mentioned hype and all that, but I've lived through what's happened in the last 10 years. I see how many people are out of work. I see the fact that, McBride, and I see that Valemount, again, they're recovering. Their economy needs to be revitalized, not just maintained. We need to grow our economies. We need to grow our communities. And when he mentions words like hype and that, but again, I lived through that. When I talk about my brother-in-law and my nephew and what their challenges they're facing as veterans, they have faced as veterans. Again, that's not hype. Again, Canada has so much potential. And again, with Harper, it actually, look at where we're at now. And the comment was made on, a politician. But I was watching Tom Mulcair in terms of when it came to had all his tough questions about the Senate. And that's actually, well, he's forthright and he's direct, and actually that's why, he's asking questions I need answers for.
Thank you very much. And that sort of concludes all the questions and answers tonight. In wrapping up, there's a whole bunch of thank yous that I just kind of want to get through here. First and foremost, I want to thank all 4 candidates tonight. You've chosen a very difficult, important, and often thankless job, and we appreciate your efforts, especially in this valley. I'd also want to thank Pat Bennett down there, not only for walking my dog every morning, but and the Toastmasters International for their assistance in timekeeping. She does. Thank you. I want to thank the organizers. That includes the Rocky Mountain Goat News, the Valemount and Area Chamber of Commerce, Valemount Community TV, and the Valley Sentinel for organizing this forum tonight. Also, I want to thank the Tourism Valemount for kindly rescheduling their tourism industry celebration so as not to conflict with this forum. Please attend Tourism Valemount's tourism industry celebration tomorrow night at the Valemount Visitor Center from 6 to 9 p.m. to learn more about tourism initiatives in our area. There's your commercial. Thank you to the Village of Valemount and the Valemount Secondary School for providing the venue for the forum. And, of course, the public for coming out and for abiding by all the rules and making my job very easy tonight. It was wonderful. I had no idea what to expect, but it was very, very simple. Finally, I want to remind you, voting day is Monday, October the 19th. And please get out and vote, and please encourage others to get out and vote, especially those younger people. I do believe that the candidates will be available for a short while in the lobby for any additional questions that you might have. Thank you, and have a great night. You're welcome.